Did you know World War II started 6 years earlier for China than for Europe? And while the West remembers Hiroshima and Normandy, China honours a brutal 14-year struggle against Japan that cost millions of lives. This year, as China marks the 80th anniversary of World War II's end, we'll uncover the forgotten story of its survival and why it still shapes Asia today. Stick around for a history you won't find in most textbooks. August 1945 is remembered around the world as the end of World War II, but while most people in the West think of the mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in China the memory is very different. Today we're going to look at how China remembers the war, the role it played, the suffering it endured, and why this history is still shaping China's relationships with Japan, America, and the wider world. So when does the war really begin? For most Western history books, the war starts in 1939 with Hitler's invasion of Poland. But for China, the war began far earlier. Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, setting up the puppet state of Manchukuo. And in 1937, the war turned into a full-scale nightmare with the Marco Polo Bridge incident, sparking the Second Sino-Japanese War, a conflict that would merge into World War II years before Europe was even at war. China's suffering during the war is hard to overstate. More than 14 million Chinese people are estimated to have died. More, perhaps up to 20 million if you include the people that died from starvation and disease that came from the war. Cities were bombed, villages destroyed, and entire populations displaced. And of course there is the most infamous atrocity, which is the Nanjing massacre of 1937. Over the course of just 6 weeks, Japanese troops slaughtered more than 200,000 men, women and children, civilians. And of course some estimates are upwards of 300,000, perhaps even more. The Japanese, or some Japanese sources, dispute that. They say it's less. But it was a horrific act of violence, and it remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. And if that wasn't enough, there's probably another atrocity that you haven't even heard of, and that is the atrocities that were committed at Unit 731, or committed by Unit 731, and it's based near Harbin in northeast China. I went and visited, it's now a museum there some almost 20 years ago, and there, and this is absolutely awful, Japanese scientists carried out biological and chemical warfare experiments on living prisoners. The cruelty of these experiments on, again, men, women and even children is almost unspeakable. But I think it's really important, to tell you, to make sure everybody knows about this thing. They used anthrax, they gave these prisoners the plague, they did some awful things to these people. And these are the memories that dominate China's story of the war, and it's far more than, say, Pearl Harbor or Normandy. Real atrocities were committed against them outside of normal warfare. And then, of course, alongside the war, millions, 14 million at least, people were killed. That's the Chinese people's memory of the war. So in the West, the war in Asia is often just a footnote. People know about Pearl Harbor, they know about the island hopping campaigns, and of course Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But less people know about China's role in the war and China's war. Of course, here in China, the narrative is very different. The atomic bombs are not the centerpiece of the Chinese war story. They're not part of the remembrance, really. I mean, they acknowledge it, obviously, and ultimately it's probably the reason why the war stopped at that point. But from a Chinese perspective, it's more about the long, and it was long, years and years, and the hard resistance of Chinese soldiers and civilians against Japan. And in fact, that brings me to the reason why I want to make this video today. First of all, I hopefully made an interesting video. I hope you guys are enjoying it. If you are, please do like and subscribe. And also I wanted to let people who perhaps weren't so clear or didn't know much about this part of history, to let them know about it. But the other reason is this: I spend a lot of my time here in China. I'm recording this in China. And while all of these celebrations were going on, and I saw it on TV, on social media, on the radio, and so on and so forth, I was thinking to myself, perhaps from a Western perspective, why is there little mention of the bombs? Why is there little mention of America's participation in the war? And I was thinking, are the Chinese people that ungrateful? And through doing research for this video and through talking to people, both young and old, I found they're not ungrateful. That's not the case at all. Of course they're grateful, but it's because it's so much more than just the bombs. It's so much more than just 4 or 5 years of the war in Asia, or the World War in general. It was going on for years and years and years. And of course that plays a major role, the nuclear bombs, the atomic bombs, but it's so much longer than that. So that's why they spend more time, and the commemorations have been more about the very, very long war, and they call it the war of resistance against Japan. And so that's why I've made this video today. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're learning some stuff. I've learned a lot making this video. So of course, China didn't fight this war alone. One of the most famous stories is the Flying Tigers, American volunteer pilots who came to China before the US officially entered the war even. And they defended Chinese cities, they trained pilots, and they became legends of wartime cooperation. To this day, the Flying Tigers have memorials and part of museums across the country, and they're really warmly remembered in China as a symbol of US-China friendship during the darkest times. Guys, in fact, if you keep watching to the end, what I'll do is I've got some quotes from some of the pilots who flew some of the in the Flying Tigers. So if you keep watching to the end, I'll read you some of the quotes. They're really quite interesting, and some incredible stats about how they managed to sort of defeat the Japanese in the air. So we're talking about southwest China, so Yunnan province, but it was the old Burma Road, and that's what they were sort of protecting. And they were it was like sort of a Battle of Britain thing, but in southwest China. So literally the American pilots, the American planes going up against the Japanese planes to protect cities, to protect the Burma Road, and their record is really incredible. But keep watching to the end and I'll give you those stats and a few quotes from the Flying Tigers. Let's talk about the aftermath of the war. Now, of course, the war left scars that were never fully or truly healed, but let's talk about the details. So for China, victory meant liberation from the Japanese occupation, but it also left the country weakened and still divided. Remember, there was a pause on the civil war while they were fighting the Japanese. But then, of course, after they defeat the Japanese, that civil war resumes. We're talking about the nationalists and the communists. And just 4 years after the end of World War II, the defeat of Japanese, there is the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Of course, that's 1949. What does that mean? That means the communists won. One of the reasons given for communist victory is that the nationalists perhaps took on more losses during the war against the Japanese. Now let's talk about the relations with Japan. Still today they remain quite complex. While the two countries, China and Japan, are major trading partners, history still casts a shadow. Why? Well, things like visits by Japanese politicians to the Yasukuni Shrine, where war criminals are honoured. And that sparks outrage in China. You can totally understand why. Meanwhile, let's talk about China's relationship with America. Now, that has shifted dramatically. So remember, you've got the Flying Tigers and you've got the atomic bombs over Japan. So they're wartime allies, right? But then after that, what do they become? They become Cold War adversaries. Now, today, it's like sort of uneasy competition. I've made lots of videos about America and China's relationship, especially trade wars. But the memory, I think, of the cooperation during World War II still surfaces in diplomacy, even if present-day reality sometimes is a bit more tense, although these days, hopefully, it's just trade where tensions arise. It's no coincidence that this year, on the 80th anniversary, lots of new movies, lots of new films have come out, and these are sort of telling wartime stories. I'm going to tell you about 4 movies right now. So first of all, as I'm recording this movie is out in the cinema, so I think the English name is Nanjing Photo Studio, in Chinese Nanjing Jiaoshanguang, and that focuses on the massacre, the Nanjing massacre. Apparently a really, really tough watch. You can imagine it would be. Now next month there's a new film called Unit 731, which will bring basically the hidden history, or the history a lot of people don't know about, and what I've just told you about, which is basically the terrible experiments and the atrocities committed up in northeast China in Harbin, Unit 731. And also there's now a movie out called Dongjida, which tells the story of the Lisbon Maru, basically the Japanese trying to murder British POWs just off the east coast of China, and then Chinese fishermen basically saving these British people. It's a really, really powerful story. In fact, so those are 3 movies out right now. So you've got Nanjing Jiaoshanguan, and you've got the Unit 731, and you've got the Dongjidao. But there's another movie I'd like to tell you about called The Sinking of the Lisbon Maru. Now, for me, that was a really, really powerful story and a powerful movie. It was almost like a documentary, but it was also interviews with survivors and relatives of the survivors, and it was almost like a detective, because the director, who was also the presenter, who actually I got a chance to interview, by the way, maybe I'll make a separate video about that. He actually went to Britain and Canada and various countries, sort of finding all the information he could about the Lisbon Maru, and that's a really, really interesting story. So look, those 3 films that are out or coming out now, if you guys want to watch it, watch them, do so, although be warned, I imagine it's going to be a tough watch. Imagine something like Schindler's List, but certainly a movie I highly recommend, The Sinking of the Lisbon Maru. Sometimes in parts a tough watch, but a really, really excellent movie. And that tells the story, as I've said, about the prisoners of war being taken, the British, mainly British prisoners of war being taken to Japan, then being accidentally torpedoed by an American ship, but then the Japanese deciding to just basically, I'm not giving the story away, it's history, and the documentary is more than this, it's so much more, it's an excellent movie. The Japanese basically deciding to sort of, shut down the hull, lock them in basically, and let them drown. Some managed to escape, some escaped and were just shot while trying to swim away. Others that managed to escape were saved by Chinese fishermen, and it's that story, and it's a really, really incredible story. So I recommend The Sinking of the Lisbon Maru, the movie. Guys, this sort of turned into almost like a history video, a history pod. If you like these kind of videos about China, please let me know. I can make lots more Chinese history videos. That's easy for me. My dissertation was on the Yuan dynasty of China. Ask me why. It's one of the shortest dynasties. It was easier for me to write about that. But I know a little bit about, I know a lot about other parts of Chinese history as well. It's a long history. But if Chinese history is something you're interested in, please let me know in the comments below what sections, what part of Chinese history, and perhaps we can make a Chinese history video selection. That'd be fun. So 80 years on, the way we remember the end of World War II still depends on where we're standing. Now, for the West, as I've already said, the story often ends with 2 atomic bombs, and that is actually why I made this video today, one of the main reasons. That was my thinking. And now I realise why here in China, for China, it's a story of 14 years of resistance, of massacres, of starvations, of relentless fighting, and terrible atrocities committed against the local populace. Now, understanding the difference, I think, is crucial, not just to appreciate history, but I think through history we can sort of understand, or perhaps better understand, some of the tensions and the mistrusts that still shape Asia today, and in fact perhaps play a role with China and its relationship with other countries around the world, even outside of Asia. But maybe one of the biggest lessons from this anniversary is simple. It's that World War II didn't have just one story. It had many. And the Chinese story is one that the world, now that China has a much bigger voice, can and will hear from me and other people. And I think on that point, this is really, really important. I've made a whole video about China's war. It's really important. My channel is basically about China, so that makes sense, right? But it's not just one voice. So, of course, I'm sure you guys know, but Japan invaded, attacked Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, all of them. So they also have their stories still, and perhaps other people better informed than me on those countries can tell those stories as well. I'm sure they're out available as well. Guys, I did promise you, I said if you keep watching, I've rambled a lot, but if you do keep watching, I will give you some quotes and some bit more information. So I've got it on my phone here. So first of all, just a few quotes. I think some of these are really, really cool. Tex Hill, one of the Flying Tigers pilots: "We were outnumbered, outgunned, and flying obsolete planes, but we had spirit, and that made the difference." I think that's so cool. From Charles Alder: "Every time you went up, you knew the odds, but you also knew those people down there were counting on you. Powerful stuff. Robert T. Smith, the Japanese thought they owned the skies. We proved them wrong. I think that's so cool. You know, some of the stats are absolutely crazy. So despite being outnumbered, and this being a volunteer force, pretty much a volunteer force, I mean they were paid, but they were a volunteer force, and being outnumbered, of course, the Flying Tigers claimed around 296 Japanese aircraft, and they lost perhaps less than 20. Some people say they lost 4. Some people say it's like almost 300 to 4. They shot down almost 300, some 296 planes, and only sort of 4 were shot down of the Flying Tigers. But some of those stats are a bit, you know, some higher, some lower. But it's really incredible. Certainly, far more Japanese planes were shot down by the Flying Tigers than Japanese managed to shoot down the Flying Tigers themselves. So incredible story, incredible bravery, and incredible memory and history for these people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Some of it was probably tough to listen to or watch, but I hope you got through it. So thank you very much. Again, if you will like and subscribe, really helps the channel out. And if you like these kind of videos, let me know and I can make some more Chinese history videos. But for me, Toby, here in China, Toby's Takeaway, that's a wrap. 谢谢，再见，拜拜。